And now I'm going to add Artyom. Did that work? Yes. Hey.
Hey, how are you?
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
We've I want to say you and me did an early live stream as a kind of MVP of how we can get more awareness out about some of the open source approaches and models, and you were sharing a bunch about that. So I'm going to have you repeat yourself a little bit, and then we'd love to dig in on a couple of things. But first, do you mind doing a quick intro for yourself?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm excited to be here today. Hi, everyone. My name is Artyom. I'm co-founder and CEO at a company called Cube, which is based on open source project with the same name. We started Cube and we open sourced it in 2019, and then in 2020 we built a company around it. So I'm coming from software data engineering background and excited to be here today and share more about our journey and what we're building with Cube and our learnings from open source and how we're thinking about AI, Gen AI, as it relates to data space.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to hear all about it. So maybe we start with like what the Cube product is today, because it's evolved a bit. But sort of what is it today?
Yeah, we call ourselves Semantic Layer, and it has a whole new meaning with Gen AI, which we can talk about in a few minutes. But original, like kind of as a product today, and like why we build it is that we found an interesting problem in the modern data stack is that as organization adopt a lot of different business intelligence visualization tools, so they build some visualization tools capabilities into their own product. What is happening is that the logic of semantic modeling, and semantic modeling is essentially idea of like where you build the metrics, right? You need to build metric revenue, metric active users, something else, right? You need to code that somewhere, right? You need to write a SQL code, a Python code, or some sort of a code, and you need to put it somewhere. So what is happening is that organizations usually kind of do a bunch of stuff and coding in Python, like to expose the data to customers. Then, like a lot of logic goes into LookML models and Looker, some sort of like some organization would use Power BI, they would put a lot of logic in Power BI. And that sort of logic is getting kind of really spread it across all these places. And in software engineering, we have this idea called DRY, do not repeat yourself. That's sort of like the whole problem that we in data, we're repeating ourselves by doing this. So we thought we would build a product, Cube, as a semantic layer to solve exactly this problem, to make data stack dry. So idea was, let's take these calculations out of the visualization layer, sort of like a decouple visualization layer and a logic layer, and I put logic on top of cloud data warehouse in this sort of like standalone semantic layer, then can be connected to all these visualization tools, Power BI's, custom visualizations, React front end, all of that. So that's a core product as we have today.
Cool. And so I guess, can you talk a bit about maybe what kinds of developers are using it and how that's evolved? Is that the right way to ask? Is that the right way to lead you sort of towards ultimately you started out as the sort of open source journey, getting developers, and then I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. Well, we started it with open source because when we had this idea, we thought, oh, how do we get into as many hands of like people as possible? And like we're kind of building for builders, right? Like people take our product and they build stuff on top of that. So I thought if like our main users are builders, because in many cases they're using Cube to power custom built internal applications. Nowadays, people build a lot of like a chat, like agents on top of Cube open source is a whole separate story. When we started, like it was mostly web applications. So, like organization would build a customer facing web application or, like internal kind of a BI application. So we thought going open source would make the most sense because that's sort of like where builders are, right? Like, like if you want to build something, where you would go? You go on GitHub and kind of, like I don't even search in Google if I want to find a library. I would just go and search on GitHub directly to find the library, like if I want to build something. So that's why we did that. I think, like over time, we build a cloud product, commercial product, because in some cases enterprises come to us and say, hey, we built on top of open source, but we really need, like an organization that can support us, like we need a commercial product. And sometimes they just go straight off to commercial product because that's how enterprises work. But initially, to get this off the ground, we thought, and I still believe that was the right approach, we were building for builders. So we went to the place where builders are, and that's GitHub.
What? Oh, interesting. So you thought about GitHub as almost like the homepage for developers, and so that's where you want to live because that's where they live. In the same way that you would, as a brand, want to be on Twitter or something or Instagram.
Right.
What is the difference between when you say some people want to go straight to the commercial product? Right. We talked earlier with a couple of other people about what separates the commercial product from the open source product. Is it, for some people it's if it's deep infrastructure, hosting it is very complicated. It's not just like throwing up a hosting kind of a server. It actually does require some ops. Other people, they talked about it as kind of an opinionated version of it is the one that's commercial, and that's and to some degree, some even have to buy their own server racks to be able to do it, but then it really works well from an infrastructure perspective. What is the difference between your commercial product and the open source version, or how did that evolve?
Yeah, it's a great question because really, to be honest, when we built open source, we open sourced it in 2019. We got a lot of this traction. We got 10,000 stars. Maybe that doesn't sound that crazy in 2025, but back in 2029, we got it in a few months. So and we were like, wow, that's crazy. So we got all this open source traction, adoption. The Slack community was pretty good. And then at some point we thought we need to think about the monetization because we kind of decided to build a company around it, right, and all of that. So we for-profit organization. And we started to brainstorm what we can build. And the first version of that was more of an instrumentation platform. Like kind of APM for people who are building sort of like with Cube, right? Like, so you would run Cube, and to be able to see performance, like a tracing, all of that stuff, you would go in a Cube cloud. And it feels like it's always so obvious. So that's kind of feels like something that many companies would build first. When I saw, like LangChain introduce LangSmith, it gave me a flashback because it's exactly what we did, right? Like kind of a tracing platform for open source project. So we built that. We then quickly realized that if we want to build a bigger sustainable business, we would probably want to own the runtime, meaning that we cannot just have a tracing because in this place we kind of, like starting to be in a weird spot. You provide a unique tracing features for your project, but still there is Datadog, still there is like all the other, like products you would compete with eventually. And it doesn't give you enough room to grow from a value perspective if you're only given this kind of a tracing functionality. So you kind of have to own runtime, meaning that you need to run the servers, right? And you need to kind of, like run the execution. So we started doing this. So we started offering sort of like a platform, like kind of hosting platform to some extent. We realized quickly that we want to go opinionated, as you mentioned. I think that's a good way to say it, because if you only provide a hosting, now at the end of the day, you will compete with other general purpose hosting platforms, right? So you need to make it unique. So we kind of, like went from a tracing platform for Cube to the hosting platform for Cube to some sort of like unique offering in a commercial, in a cloud that is built on top of Cube core, right? So it's built on top of Cube open source, but it's sort of deviated to some extent. So it's like it's a derivative work on top of the open source project. And then when I looked at like when I'm looking at our journey, it sort of like really reminds the Databricks and Spark story in a way that, like when we think about Databricks, we don't think about that Databricks is just hosted Spark, right? It's just way, way bigger than that. But it all started from Spark, right? So like that, we have the same story here. And I think that's the only viable, one of the like, not maybe only, but it definitely feels like a viable option for, like open source commercialization journey.
So that's really interesting to think of, to think about Databricks as reducing it to its hosted Spark is almost saying that highlights how complex being hosted Spark is. And so do you think that today the open source projects, the projects that are worth releasing open source, that develop, that are worth, that they do get traction, just like you did. I mean, obviously it was sort of one open source generation ago, but they are almost inherently more technical, and that's why they're getting popularity. And I guess I'm just kind of curious, you mentioned LangChain. I don't think of LangChain as being as, I think about it as everything being in one place, but I don't necessarily think about it as being as technical. But maybe that's actually not true, because if you have a bunch of other, you're calling OpenAI embeddings over here, and you want to pull the Nomic embeddings over here, and I want to push out something over here, it actually is deeper infrastructure. What's your sense of that?
Yeah, so your question is does the open source project have to be very deep technical to be successful?
I guess I'm actually because you use the LangChain example specifically, just as an example, where does it fall on the deeply technical spectrum of, I can picture old open source projects. They're just kind of fun open source projects versus something that's deeply technical.
Yeah, well, I think that LangChain is very helpful in solving a real world problem with, like providing the layer of abstraction over the, like direct models calling. And then LangGraph also adds some functionality around chaining different calls, kind of building the graph of the agents. So there's a lot of value in that, but that's a high level application level framework.
Right.
So I think the level of value here is similar to some extent as the level of something like a Ruby on Rails, right? So like I think LangChain might become kind of Ruby on Rails, like for like agents world, right? Obviously there are like competition like Crew AI and some other frameworks, so we'll see what will get more traction. Is it a very deep technical? I think yes and no, like it's not that probably hard from like hardcore software engineering perspective, but the maturity and experience and years just put into that, like it's like with any framework, it's like so many edge cases, so many kind of things, and a lot of people contribute into it, and there's just like a shared experience of all these developers kind of put into that, like especially years. I think that's valuable, but it's obviously inherently it's less technical that, like would say Kafka implementation in Rust, right, or something like that.
That's helpful. I like the Ruby on Rails analogy a lot, because it's highly opinionated, right? I mean, Ruby on Rails was like extremely opinionated, and that's kind of a helpful, I think, for a lot of developers who came up during that era. It's a helpful example. Well, look, thank you so much for joining. This is awesome. We are going to be synthesizing all of these insights and sharing them back out. But thank you for sharing your kind of experience building out Cube.
Yeah, sure. It was really great joining you today, and thank you, everyone.